What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Jared Speaks, episode 13. I'm genuinely grateful today. Every episode I record, I feel this show's becoming more of what it's supposed to be. And the people showing up for these conversations, the ones who've been here since the beginning, and the ones who just found it, you are the reason I keep going deeper. Thank you for trusting me with your time. This one's going to mean something. Today, we're talking about generational trauma. And I'm going to get personal in a way that I think is going to make a lot of people feel less alone. Let's go. Have you ever caught yourself in the middle of a reaction and thought, wait, that is my mom or my dad or somebody from further back I barely knew? Not because you decided to be like them, not because you sat down one day and thought this is a great way to handle things, but because somewhere along the way it just got into you, became part of how you operate, it became automatic. That is what today is about. The patterns we carry did not choose. We didn't choose. The ways of thinking and reacting and seeing the world that got passed down to us is like furniture that nobody asked if we even wanted. And the question that I think matters more than any other question on this topic: what are you going to do with it now that you see it? Let's break down what generational trauma actually is. Let me break it down simply because I think the term sounds heavier and more clinical than what it needs to. Generational trauma is just this: pain, patterns, and ways of surviving that get passed from one generation to the next. Not always through big dramatic events, sometimes through the quiet everyday stuff. The way emotions were handled in your house, the things that were never talked about, the beliefs about work and worth and what love looks like that nobody ever said out loud, but everybody lived by. Your grandparents went through things. Those things shaped how they moved through the world. That shaped how they raised your parents. And your parents brought all of that, consciously and unconsciously, into the house that you grew up in. And you absorbed it. Not because anyone set you down and taught it to you, but because that was just how things were. That was the water you were swimming in. And the tricky part is that most of it does not feel like trauma. It just feels like personality. Like, this is just who I am. This is just how our family does things. Until you start looking closer and you realize some of what you thought was yours was never actually yours to begin with. There are two main ways this gets passed down, and I want to walk through both of them. The first is through behavior. Children are wired to learn from the people closest to them, not from what those people say, from what those people do, how they handle stress, how they argue, how they show or do not show love, how they react when things go wrong. You watched all of that. You took notes without knowing that you were taking notes. And your brain filed it as it always has. This is how a person handles life. So if the person you watched handled life had a short fuse, you probably have some version of that short fuse too. If the person you watched worked themselves into the ground because that was how they proved their worth, you probably inherited some version of that belief. Not because it was the right way, but because it was the only way you saw modeled. The second way is through something that honestly still amazes me when I think about it. Researchers have found that trauma, real heavy lived trauma, can actually change the way certain parts of your biology work. And those changes can be passed down. Studies on people who lived through extreme hardship showed that their children and grandchildren had different stress responses than average. Their bodies were wired as if they'd been through something, even when they had not been through anything. Just think about that. The experiences of people who came before you can be living in your nervous system right now, shaping how you respond to threat, to stress, to conflict, without you ever having lived through what they lived through. That is not a small thing. I want to get specific here because I think specific is what actually helps people, not general statements about family patterns, just real things. My grandfather had a short fuse, and I see it in myself. That edge that comes up fast when something feels off or wrong or like it should have been handled differently. The specific thing I notice, and this is so specific it almost makes me laugh, is the thing about leaving early for my doctor's appointments. My grandfather would get genuinely upset when other people don't leave early enough, like for their appointments, when the timing feels too close for comfort. And I have that same wire in me, that same internal alarm that goes off when things feel like they're cutting it too close. Now, is that the worst pattern to inherit? No. But the point is, I did not choose it. Nobody set me down and explained that tight timing equals danger. It just got into me somewhere along the way and became part of how I operate. And the short fuse, more broadly, I've had to work on that. I've caught up myself in moments that my grandfather would have recognized. And once you see where it came from, it changes everything. Not because you suddenly do not feel it anymore, but because you get a little space between the feeling and the reaction. You realize this is not just me, this is something older than me, and I get to decide how much of it I carry forward. Here's one that I think is going to land for a lot of people. For a long time, I had a belief that if you were not working constantly, you were failing. Not just working hard, working beyond hard. The kind of working where you're exhausted and you'll still push. Where stopping feels like losing. Where rest feels like falling behind. I believe that giving 110% was the baseline. That anything less meant you were not serious or not worthy and not enough. And I worked like that. I ran that pattern hard. And here's where that pattern actually starts producing something. And it starts with exhaustion and the feeling that no matter how much you give, you're not gaining any ground, because you cannot gain ground when the measuring stick keeps moving, when the belief underneath it all is that you're never quite doing enough. That belief was not mine. I did not have to arrive at it through my own experience and decide it was true. It was handed to me. Somewhere in my family line, somebody survived by working that way, and it became the family code for what a person of worth does. And I picked it up and ran with it for years before I finally looked at it and said, that's not actually true. You do not have to work yourself into the ground to be successful. You do not have to earn rest. You do not have to prove your worth through exhaustion. That realization didn't happen overnight, but it started with being able to see the belief clearly, enough so to even question it. And that started with understanding that it was not originally mine. I want to connect this to episode 6 for a second because I think it makes something click. We talked about how your brain filters reality, how it edits what you see and hear and feel before it even reaches your conscious awareness, how it decides what is safe, what is a threat, what matters, and what does not. Generational trauma is one of the things that programs that filter, and it gets programmed early before you had the ability to even question it, before you had any other reference point to compare it to. So the filter that your grandfather's short fuse installed might be telling you right now that certain things are more threatening than they actually are. The filter that the workaholic belief installed might be making rest feel dangerous when it's not. And you're not even aware it's happening because by the time you're old enough to think about it, the filter has been running for years. You're not always reacting to what is actually in front of you. Sometimes you're reacting to something that happened 2 generations before you was born. And it feels completely real and completely present because the filter does not timestamp the things it learned. Here is what I want to make clear you do not have to fix everything. You do not have to go back and heal every wound in your family line. You do not have to have it all figured out before you can start doing something differently. You just have to be aware enough to make a difficult choice in the moment. With my kids, I made a decision when they're upset, when the big feelings come up. I'm not going to do what was done for most of us. I'm not going to tell them to stop crying, or I'm not going to make them feel like their emotions are too much or need to be managed or hidden. I get down on their level and I look them in the eyes and I tell them it's okay to have big feelings. I tell them that it's okay to cry. It's okay to let it all out because daddy is right here. Everything's going to be okay. And I say it slowly in a calm voice. And I've noticed something. They recover faster than you would expect because what they needed was not for the feeling to stop. They needed to know the feeling was safe, that having it was not going to cause a problem, that they were not alone. That is the opposite of what a lot of us get. A lot of us got the message, consciously or not, that big emotions were inconvenient, that they needed to be controlled or hidden or pushed through. And so when we learn to bury them, and buried things do not disappear, they just go underground to find other ways out. The small daily moments of doing it differently, those are the chain breaking. Not dramatically, not all at once, but link by link. I want to share something that happened recently, and I'm going to try to get through this without getting emotional, but I can't promise anything. Something happened one day that hit me hard. I was upset. I was crying. And my youngest son, he's 4 years old, he came over to me. He put his hand on me and said, "You have big feelings?" I said, "Yes, son. Daddy has big feelings." He just stayed there with me. That 4 year old boy doing exactly what I'd been doing for him. I don't have the words for what that felt like, but I'm going to try. That was the cycle breaking right there in that moment. That little boy had absorbed something I was trying to give him. That big feelings are okay, that you don't have to be alone in them, that it feel it feels that it is safe to feel. And he turned around and gave it back to me when I needed it. He didn't learn it from my grandfather. He didn't learn it from some old program that got handed down without anyone choosing it. He learned that from me in the small daily moments of getting down on his level and telling him everything was going to be okay. That is what breaking the cycle actually looks like. It does not look like a dramatic transformation. It looks like a 4-year old putting his hand on his dad and asking if he has big feelings. And knowing the answer is yes, and knowing that is okay. I do not want to leave you with something heavy and not give you anywhere to go with it. So let me give you a few things that I think actually help. Start by just noticing, not fixing, not judging, just noticing. When you react in a way that feels automatic, when the short fuse fires, when the exhaustion sets in, when the old belief about yourself shows up, pause that for a second and ask where this came from. Whose voice is that? Whose pattern is it? That question alone creates space. And space is where change happens. When you're with your kids or anyone you love, try to respond to emotions instead of shutting them down. You do not have to have the perfect words. You just have to stay, to not leave when the feelings get big. The act of staying is the whole message. Be patient with yourself when the old patterns show up, because they will. You spent years running them. They're not going to disappear overnight. But every time you catch them and choose differently, even a little bit, you're doing something your grandparents may not have had the awareness to do. You are becoming the turning point. That is episode 13, everybody. If this one brought something up, sit with it. Think about the patterns you carry that might not have started with you. Think about the small moments where you can choose differently. And be gentle with yourself in the process. That is not about blame, it's about awareness. It's about deciding where the story changes. To the people who have been here since episode 1, you have watched this show go deep in ways I did not plan. And I'm grateful for every single one of you who stayed for it. If you have not followed yet, please could you go do that wherever you are listening? Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, YouTube. Hit that follow button. Leave a rating if you can. It helps the show out more than you know. Share this if it landed for you. You know somebody carrying weight they did not choose. This episode is for them. A new episode tomorrow. Stay curious, take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you then.